Hey everyone, this is Friedel Hakoreja Raven. I'm here with my recap and review of the Gilded Age season number 1, episode number 2, which is titled Money Isn't Everything. And I have to say that I really ended up enjoying this episode. There was some excitement going on, especially near the end of the episode. And yeah, the Russells are really making their way into New York social life. And I'm looking forward to seeing how the rest of the women are going to treat Mrs. Russell now after the stunt that her husband pulled. But yeah, anyway, coming to the opening of this episode, we see that the head maid at the Van Ryan house, she is in trouble. We have this mysterious man coming in and threatening her to get her the money, get him the money that she owes him. And she's like, I don't know, I'm not really sure how I can get that money. And he's like, you can figure it out. I'll be coming back tomorrow. So that's an issue that she needs to deal with. And then we cut to Miriam and Peggy, and yeah, Peggy ended up accompanying Miriam to these fittings, and we have this woman over here who kind of looked like John Cena in drag to me, but yeah. Anyway, Miriam is like, you know what? My aunts don't necessarily allow me to go anywhere without someone accompanying me. So hi, I'm glad that you're with me, Peggy. And also, how's your writing going? And Peggy is quite excited because apparently she has been sending some queries, and Miriam wants to know the publications that she sent the queries to. And Peggy's like, I don't want to jinx it, so I'll let you know if I hear back from them. And this is where she's like, you know what, Miriam? I also have a favor to ask of you. And she ended up asking a favor because Miriam told Peggy that a friend of hers is coming to visit New York, and apparently it's Mr. Riker, a lawyer who helped her with her father's estate and all of that stuff. And yeah, this is where Miriam is like, yeah, Peggy is like, Miriam, I'm in need of a lawyer for advice. So do you think that Mr. Rikes can help me? And Miriam is like, you know what? I'll ask him when he comes over. And then everyone comes home, and Oscar is sitting with his mom. And yeah, Oscar actually wants to get to know the Russells because it turns out that Oscar kind of likes Gladys, Mr. and Mrs. Russell's daughter. And yeah, Agnes Van Ryan is like, is her daughter even out yet? Has she been presented? And no, she hasn't. But Marion is like, you know what? I've met her and I liked her. So yeah, Oscar has her eyes on Gladys. And even though isn't straight, he has a boyfriend. His name is John. I think his name is, yeah, John Adams. But I can understand where Oscar is coming from. Apparently, he wants to marry for money. He wants to marry a woman who has a lot of money to her name. And also, considering the time that he lives in, he can't go out and marry another dude. So I guess as far as he's concerned, Gladys would be a good option because Gladys is also very, very young. And I guess he can handle her when it comes to his sexuality and all of that stuff. But yeah, Oscar is like, you know what, we should get to know the Russells more. And Agnes is like, that's not happening. So we cut to the kitchen, and the head maid is crying, and the younger maid is like, "What's up? What's happening? What's wrong?" And the head maid is like, you don't want to get involved in this. I don't want to share what's troubling me." And then we cut to Peggy, and yeah, I'm not really sure what her name is. Yeah, learning the names of a whole lot of characters is going to take me time. So anyway, she asks Peggy that she can see Peggy working for Agnes Van Ryan, and how Peggy must think that she's now some kind of a secretary. And Barrister comes in, and Barrister is like, it's not like she's some kind of a secretary, she is an actual secretary, and that puts her above you in the pecking order. So show her some respect. And also, this is where the younger maid ends up saying that Oscar is quite handsome. And yeah, this is where this woman ends up telling the younger maid that, you know what, you can think that if you want, but Oscar will never even look at a young woman like you, because he wants to marry for money and all of that stuff. So we cut to Miriam and Agnes and Ada sitting down for to eat lunch, and yeah, this is where Miriam is like, you know what, I have to go to the charity stalls tomorrow, and Agnes is like, what kind of charity stalls? Well, it's the charity to help war widows and orphans, and Agnes is like, okay, I guess it's boring enough to be respectful. So we cut to the Russells, and Mr. Russell talks to his wife about this charity show that's happening, and he's like, "Weren't you invited?" And yeah, Bertha is like, "They just wanted our money, so yeah, I'm not invited. They didn't even ask me to set up a stall." And Mr. Russell is the head of the social group who is organizing the charity is called Mrs. Morris, and Mr. Russell is like, you know what, Mr. Morris is a very influential person that I want to meet. He's on some sort of board, so I want you to invite Mrs. Morris over for dinner and also invite his husband. And Bertha's like, yeah, I'll see what I can do. So Mr. Morris gets the Russell's invitation, and he's like, it's very interesting that they also invited me for dinner. So I guess it means that Mr. Russell wants to talk to me about something. And yeah, Mrs. Morris is hesitating because she doesn't want to interact with the Russells because that will get the other women to talk, and she doesn't want that. And Mr. Morris is like, you know what? But we have to do this because I'm very interested in seeing what Mr. Russell wants to talk to me about. He is a very rich person, and Mrs. Morris is like, what about Mrs. Astor if she finds out? And Mr. Morris was like, you know what, don't worry about it. Mrs. Astor knows how the world works. So we got to dinner time. And this is where Ada brings up a theory of hers, and she's like, you know what? Maybe Oscar knows other suitors that might be good for Marian, because John didn't work out because John is queer, but the aunts don't know that. And also, this is where Ada is like, maybe Oscar might end up marrying Miriam, and Agnes is like, put that thought out of your mind. Oscar isn't going to marry Miriam. They are first cousins. Yeah, we know that, but also Miriam has no money, and yeah, Agnes knows her son. She knows that he's going to marry someone who has a lot of money. Then we cut to the help downstairs at the Russell's house, and we have the cook and we have the head maid over here. And these two talk about where they came from, and apparently her father was a farmer, and her mother used to pick up berries and all of that stuff. And working in a big house like this is the first for her, and she didn't even know that a world like this existed. And then the French chef, I guess he's unsatisfied with the life that he's living or the profession that he's in. So I guess these two are going to be a thing. Who knows? So we got to a meeting, and all of the women are sitting around and they're discussing the upcoming charity. And this is where Miriam is like, why didn't we invite Mrs. Russell and ask her to set up a stall? And they're like, we aren't going to invite Mrs. Russell. She's basically tainted, and we don't need to interact with we don't need to interact with her more than necessary. And Miriam is like, but we will still ask for her money, huh? So yeah, Miriam realizes that, yeah, the other women want Mrs. Russell money, but they don't want to interact with Mrs. Russell. And this is where Mr. Morris comes in, and Mr. Morris is like, where is the charity even happening? And it turns out that it's happening at an armory and all of that stuff. Or did that scene occur later? I guess it occurred later. Yeah, my bad. So yeah, this is basically where Mr. Morris ends up talking to his wife about why Mrs. Russell wasn't invited. And yeah, Mrs. Russell is like, it is what it is. We continue operating as we have always operated. And this is also where Mrs. Morris ends up telling the rest of the women that they will be having dinner at the Russells, and that kind of surprises the rest of the women. So we cut to Barrister, and he ended up opening up this cupboard which has the silverware in it, and the head maid ends up going to, or the cook. Yeah, she's the cook, not the maid. Why am I saying maid? She's the cook. So the head cook goes in and she steals 2 pieces from there. And as she's trying to pay up the other man who wants the money, he's like, you know what, I don't need your junk, I need actual money. And Peggy comes in, and Peggy's like, what the heck is happening? And that allows the mystery man to run away, and he's like, you know what, you still owe me money. And so yeah, the head cook needs to tell, she has no other choice but to tell Peggy that she's in trouble. Then we cut to Mr. Russell, and he's looking for Mrs. Russell, and yeah, Mrs. Turner is here, and Mrs. Turner is like, Mrs. Russell isn't here. She went with Mr. White to look at some paintings. And also, for those of you who don't know, Mr. White was an actual person, and you need to read up on him. He was quite problematic, basically a villain. Read up on him. And this is also where Mrs. Turner ends up flirting with Mr. Russell, and I'm like, don't go down this route. I really don't want these to hook up, but let's see what happens. So Mr. Rikes comes for tea, and Miriam is entertaining him, and Miriam is like, did you always wanted to come to New York? Why are you here? And Mr. Rikes is like, well, I'm not really feeling happy in Pennsylvania no more. So I'll be coming to New York and starting afresh, and I'll be near you because I want to be near you. I want to be your friend and all of that stuff. So he's basically flirting with Miriam while Agnes is sitting right there. So as they're drinking tea, Oscar comes in, and Oscar ended up bringing Larry Russell. And yeah, Agnes isn't a fan of that because she doesn't want to continue interacting with the Russells, but Oscar is like, hey, I already know Mr. Larry Russell, so that's why I invited him, and also because Oscar wants to get closer to Gladys in order to marry her. So of course he's trying to befriend her brother. So while everyone is having tea, this is where Miriam and Larry are talking to each other, and Larry is like, you know what? Judging by the face that your aunt has, I won't be coming back here anytime soon, huh? Yeah, Agnes isn't a fan of Larry and Miriam being friends. So the head cook ended up telling Peggy that she's in trouble and she owes the man money. And the younger help comes in and she's like, I need to get involved too. I need you to tell me. And yeah, she's and the older cook is like, you know what, Peggy, just tell her. So it's time for Mr. Rikes to go, and Mr. Rikes is like, "Yeah, I'll be headed to Pennsylvania in like a day or two, and I'll be back in New York, and then I'll start afresh." And Marion is like, "You know what? I would like that. I would like that. There's a lot for you to do in New York." And this is where before he goes, she ends up asking him for a favor, and she's like, "You know what? My friend Peggy, she wants advice from a lawyer who handles people like her. So do you think you can do that, or do that, or maybe refer me to someone who handles such cases?" And yeah, Mr. Reich is like, you know what? I'll do it. I'll do it for free because he is basically in love with Mary. So they decide to meet each other at the park tomorrow. So Marion heads back in, and yeah, Agnes is having words with Oscar about inviting Larry, and that there's no need for us to continue being friends with the Russells. And Oscar is like, yeah, whatever you say, Mom, you're just being prejudiced, and we are basically neighbors, so it's a fact that we will be getting to interact with each other. So we cut to the dinner with the Morrises. And yeah, Bertha and Mrs. Morris are talking about the design of the house and how Mr. White ended up building it. And I'm like, you know what? I really hope that this show ends up handling Mr. White's scandals and crimes and all of that stuff. And that's really going to hurt the Russells if that ever happens. So yeah, Mr. Morris is very pleased by the food that's been presented, and they're also very quite they're quite impressed by the fact that the Russells have a French chef, an expensive French chef. So they were talking. The two of all four of them are talking about charity, and that the charity will be held at an armory. And Bertha is like, you know what? If the armory doesn't come true, you can always have the charity in my ballroom. And they end up looking at the they end up walking around a very impressive ballroom that the Russells have. And this is where Mr. Russell is like, you know what, Mr. Morris, I want to talk to you about something. And they head off. So Peggy ends up telling Miriam about the trouble that the head cook is in, and yeah, Peggy feels sorry for her because Peggy is like, you know what, I don't want her getting sacked and all of that stuff, and Miriam is like, we have to help her, we have to find a way to help her somehow. And this is also where Miriam tells Peggy that Mr. Reichs agreed to meet her to give her advice about whatever issue that she's facing. And yeah, while they're talking, Aunt Agnes comes in, and Aunt Agnes ends up handing these letters to Peggy, and she's like, these letters are from assorted presidents, artists looking for patrons, and other socially influential people. And yeah, Peggy is like, you know what, I'll go through these, and they do look interesting and all of that stuff. And Agnes is like, if only Oscar thought that. And this is where Peggy tells Agnes that she appreciates that Agnes took a chance on her, and Agnes is like, you know what, if there's a thing that I learned in life is that if you want to help someone who wants to help themselves. And she's just glad that she ended up giving Peggy this chance. So, coming to the conversation that Mr. Russell and Mr. Morris have, it turns out it is basically about selling and buying shares in basically an illegal way. And Mr. Russell wants to create another railway station in New York. However, there are other tracks here already. And then they talk about buying shares and also passing a law. And from what I can understand, Mr. Russell wants Mr. Morris and the rest of the men to buy up the shares, and then after the law is passed, they will be able to sell off the shares at an impressive profit. So we got to Mr. Baudouin. I guess his name is Baudouin or something. But yeah, the French cook, and he's talking to the head help again. And yeah, he's very impressed that who was it? The head. The names, yeah. But basically, he's being told that Mr. Morris was very impressed by his cooking, and I guess that even that doesn't make him feel happy. I guess he doesn't want to be a chef no more. It's nighttime, and Agnes wants to talk to Ada. And Agnes is like, you know what, Ada, I need to make myself clear. I need you to stop. I need you to stop urging more, pushing, lightly pushing or nudging Miriam to go ahead and continue being friends with Mr. Rikes. And Ada is like, but why is that wrong? Mr. Rikes is a lawyer. He likes Miriam. Don't you want Miriam to be happy? And Agnes is like, yeah, I want Miriam to be happy, but I want her to be happy with someone who gives her support, who has money and all of that stuff, and maybe some affection, Ada. And yeah, Ada wants Miriam to marry for money, and Agnes is like, you know what, that's not going to happen. Not Ada, my bad. Ada wants Miriam to marry for love. However, Agnes wants Miriam to marry for the money because she needs the stability in life. And this is also where Agnes is like, you know what, all of my money will be left to Oscar because it is rightfully his. So I want Miriam to be taken care of. And Ada's like, what about me? And Agnes is like, oh, don't worry, I'll outlive you or something. She says something to that effect. So Ada doesn't need anything to worry about. So it's the next day, and Peggy and Miriam go to meet Mr. Rikes at the park. And this is where Mr. Rikes ends up telling Miriam about what he read in the guidebook about the fountain, and that how it was designed by a woman and all of that stuff. And yeah, Peggy is ready to talk to Mr. Rikes, and they go off to talk. And while that's happening, Gladys ends up noticing Miriam at the park. She's with Mrs. Turner, and they were at the dressmakers to try on some dresses and to make sure that Gladys didn't change up the designs that her mom chose for her. And this is also where Gladys ends up mentioning Oscar and that how she fancies Oscar, and he makes her laugh and all of that stuff. And Miriam is like, yeah, I can see that. But then again, and they also talk about rules, because the fact is that when Oscar noticed them, Oscar was only able to take Larry with them for lunch. However, Gladys wasn't able to accompany them, and Miriam is like, you know what? It doesn't make any sense to me, this rule, because you would just be out having dinner with your brother and his friend. It's a normal thing to do, but yeah, these women have a lot of rules to follow. So Mr. Rikes is done talking to Peggy, and he has given her the advice that she wanted. And this is where Mr. Rikes says goodbye to Miriam, and he's like, you know what? I'll be back. And Miriam is like, I'll be looking forward to it. So Peggy and Miriam come back home, and this is where the head maid ends up asking Peggy where they were, and Peggy was like, "Well, we went to go meet Mr. Rikes," and she's like, "Why did you say we?" And Peggy is like, "Oh, I said we. Oh, no. Miriam just wanted to say goodbye to Mr. Rikes because he's going back to Pennsylvania and all of that stuff." And I'm like, "Get off Peggy's case, woman! Get off her!" So we cut to Oscar in one of the lounges, and Miriam goes in, and Miriam is like, "Cousin Oscar, I need some advice." And Cousin Oscar is like, "Okay, talk. What type of advice do you want? From me?" And she's like, "Well, I couldn't go to Aunt Agnes with this, so I'll tell you." So while that's happening, Mr. Morris and Mr. Russell talk about their plan, and Mr. Russell is like, "What did the other men say?" And Mr. Morris is like, "Well, the other men are very interested in the plan. However, they aren't keen on interacting with you because, yeah, they are a snobbish bunch." And Mr. Russell understands that. He knows that all of this is going to take time. So Miriam ended up telling Oscar about how the head cook is in debt, and she needs $50. I'm like, shit, $50 back in that time in order to pay up what she owes. And Oscar is like, you know what, Miriam, I can do that. I can give you the $50 to help the head cook. However, I need you to do me a favor. Do you know Gladys Russell? And Miriam is like, yeah, I do. And he's like, you know what, I need you to get her to go out with you, and you don't need to tell anyone that I'll be there as well. So I'll go and meet you too, and I need you to let me sit with her and all of that stuff. He basically wants Miriam to be his wing woman and get him closer to Gladys. And Miriam is like, yeah, I guess I'll see what I can do. And Ada walks in, and Ada is like, something's going on here. So moving on, we go to the Morrises, and this is where Mr. Morris asks Mrs. Morris about what happened with the charity, and Mrs. Morris is like, well, the armory came true. It turns out that it was double booked, so we'll have to go to the Fifth Avenue Hotel. We'll have to pay, of course, so the profits will be low. And Mr. Morris is like, well, you could always take up Mrs. Russell on her offer to have the charity in her ballroom. And Mrs. Morris is like, yeah, I don't think the other women will like that. And Mr. Morris is like, you know what? I don't think that Mr. Russell would like that. And I'm like, oh, Mrs. Morris, you don't know what you just did. You have no idea what you just did. So it's nighttime and Miriam is getting ready for bed. And yeah, this is where Ada comes in. And Ada is like, you know what? I could sense something that you were up to, that you two were up to something. So I ended up asking Oscar, and it turns out that he told me about the cook owing $50. And what the heck did you get yourself involved in, Miriam? And Miriam is like, well, I just needed to help the cook because I didn't want her to get sacked and all of that stuff. And yeah, I need to do this. And Ada's like, you know what? There's no need for you to take the money from Oscar. I can give you the $50. And Miriam is like, you have the money. You have money, Aunt Ada. And Aunt Ada is like, well, I'm not penniless, Miriam. So yeah, this is where she is like, you know what? If you're ever in trouble, you need to come to me to talk about this. And also, and this is where Miriam also tells Aunt Ada that. The $50 are owed because the cook was into gambling, because that's what Peggy told her and all of that stuff. And Ada is like, well, are you sure that if we give her the money that she'll stop her gambling? And Miriam is like, well, we'll pray, we hope so, because she does feel very regretful about her actions. And yeah, these two end up having a heart to heart, and this is where. Ada is like, well, did you hear from Mr. Reichs and after he went? And Miriam is like, no, not yet. And Ada's like, you know what? If you hear from him, I want you to be kind to your Aunt Agnes. She just wants you to be happy. I know that you know that she doesn't want you being friends with Mr. Reichs, but it is what it is. But I just need you to remember that both of your aunts just want you to be happy. And this is also where Miriam ends up asking Aunt Ada about whether or not she hates her father the way that Aunt Agnes does. And Ada's like, no, it's different for us because Agnes was older and I was just a baby, and Harry used to tease me and make me laugh. So I don't hate your dad the way that Aunt Agnes does. And that gives some peace to Miriam. And again, Aunt Ada's like, remember, both of your aunts just want you to be happy. And yeah, before she goes, Miriam is like, well, I love you, Aunt Ada. And Aunt Ada is like, well, you wouldn't be saying that if you didn't mean if you didn't mean it. So yeah, I trust you. So it's the next day, and it makes the news that the charity has been shifted to the Fifth Avenue Hotel, and Bertha is angry. She has no chill, especially after she ended up offering her ballroom for the charity, and she is a mess. She ends up throwing her breakfast away, and yeah, this is bad. This is bad. So it's time for the charity, and yeah, everyone is getting ready for the charity, and this is where Mrs. Fane talks to Miriam about the charity being held here, and that the Russells don't necessarily appreciate why why the rest of the women aren't interacting with them and all of that stuff. So Mrs. Astor comes in to open the charity, and for those of you who don't know, Mrs. Astor was a real person back in New York during this era. She was a very, very high profile socialite. You can read up on her on Wikipedia if you want to learn more about her. And yeah, Mr. Astor gives a little short speech about that she wants everyone to pay what they can in order to help the cause. So the bazaar has been opened, and this is where Mrs. Chamberlain ends up talking to Miriam, and she's like. You're quite brave, considering that you're being kind towards me and interacting with me, because I suppose that your Aunt Agnes told you not to talk to me no more. And Miriam is like, yeah, I've heard some things about you, but it doesn't bother me. So I guess these two are going to be friends. Apparently, there's something in Mrs. Chamberlain's past that makes the rest of the women walk away from her. So, and apparently her money is tainted. So I'm really interested in seeing what that's about, because when the aunts arrive, Mrs. Chamberlain is like, well, I bought some handkerchiefs from you, and I ended up giving you some charity money. But I need to walk away because I guess your aunts are going to ask you about what we were talking about. And yeah, after Mrs. Chamberlain walks away, Aunt Agnes is like, what the heck were you talking about with that woman? And her money is tainted. And Miriam is like, well, she was just here to buy some handkerchiefs for charity. And yeah, you are saying that her money is tainted. But if you're living in a single room with no food or no water, I think you would take that money. So the Russells arrive, and of course, Oscar makes a beeline towards Gladys, and he basically ends up, he's being very forward in front of Gladys's mom, and he basically is like, you know what, I was just telling Miss Russell that we should be meeting each other more, and Bertha is like, But yeah, this is where Gladys is like, you know what, Mr. Oscar Russell is just teasing us. He's a friend of Larry's, and we have met each other before. So I guess Oscar is really going to try and get to know Gladys better. Now I'm looking forward to seeing what John thinks about that. Is John going to be jealous, or is John going to be understanding when it comes to what Oscar is doing and what he needs to do, considering the time period that they're in? So, as everyone is walking around, this is where Mr. Russell ends up meeting Mrs. Morris and Mrs. Fain, and he's like, okay, so you are the two women who decided that my wife's ballroom wasn't good enough to hold this charity, huh? And the two women are like, Mr. Russell, there's no need for you to cause a commotion. And Mr. Russell is like, I will be causing a commotion. So he ends up going to a stall that's selling these hats, and he's like, Madam, how much money were you expecting to make during this 3-day charity? And she's like, maybe $30-40. And he's like, well, here's $100, and on one condition. I want you to pack this all up, and I want you to send all of these items to my address in an hour, and I also need you to pack up the stall. And the woman is like, yeah, I can do that, because this is the reason why we are holding the charity, right? So Mr. Russell ends up going around the charity and offering everyone $100 to close shop and send all of the items to his house. And yeah, the women agree, because that's a lot of money to be made when it comes to a charity. They ended up raising a whole lot of money for charity in a single 5 minutes than they would have in like 3 days. And yeah, Mrs. Morris ends up going to Bertha, and she's like, you need to stop your husband from pulling the stunt, because doing this won't impress the people that you want to impress. And Bertha is like, well, I guess you're wrong, because pulling such a stunt is exactly what's going to impress a whole lot of people, and the bazaar is going to be the most successful of all. Yeah, Bertha is just impressed by what her husband is doing to support her. And Miriam ends up talking to Larry, and she's like, you know what? I don't think that your father's motives are any good. But you know what? This is fun. This is very, very fun. So Mr. Russell ends up offering Miriam $100, and she is like, you know what? I should ask for 5 and change the game. But you know what? I'll take it, Mr. Russell. So yeah, Mr. Russell ended up buying the entire charity, and he ended up paying a whole lot of money. And Larry is like, well, Miriam, can I help you pack this up? And Miriam is like, no, there's no need. I'm just having fun. You go along now. So everyone is leaving, and Mrs. Morris is like, Mrs. Astor, where are you going? Mr. Astor is like, well, the bazaar is over. Why the heck would you expect me to stay here? I have to go. So basically, Mrs. Astor has taken notice of Mr. Russell. And Mrs. Agnes Van Ryan is like, you know what? I guess the ship is sinking, and we should follow the example of rats. and Ada is like, I don't think that's very nice, Agnes. So yeah, everyone is leaving. And Mrs. Astor goes back home, and she ends up meeting her daughter, Carrie Astor. And Carrie Astor is a real person as well. And Carrie Astor is like, wait, Mom, you're back. I thought you were going to be at the charity. I was going to meet you there. And Mrs. Astor is like, well, the charity is over because of a man called Mr. Russell. And she ends up telling Carrie about what Mr. Russell did and how she's very impressed by him. And that they'll probably end up hearing of him soon enough. And we get a scene where the Russells are going back home, and Bertha, she's just happy about what her husband did, and her husband is very happy about what he just did too. So the episode ends with Mrs. Astor basically telling Carrie that, you know what? I'm just happy that I ended up getting a free morning tomorrow, because that's a treat that I need to savor. And again, Carrie is like, okay, so you want us to be friends with the Russells? And Mr. Astor is like, no, not friends yet. And this is where the episode ends. In my opinion, it was a very, very enjoyable episode. The stunt that Mr. Russell pulled, I loved it. And also the fact that Peggy ended up talking to Mr. Reichs, I'm looking forward to seeing what that's about. And of course, I'm interested in seeing how Oscar is going to make Gladys fall for him and marry him, and what John thinks about all of that. So yeah, let me know what you thought of the episode down in the comment section below. And until next time, stay happy, stay safe, stay blessed. See you guys later. Bye.